Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast. Now, I'm talking to you in a lockdown UK, so my Black Friday sales and Christmas gifts are all going to have to be purchased online this year. Unsurprisingly, cybersecurity experts are warning again that companies with online shops must have adequate protection against DDoS attacks. Especially, I think it was last year or the year before, there was a 70% increase in those kind of cyber attacks that were recorded on Black Friday alone. And on this podcast, I don't assume that everybody knows what a DDoS attack is or how to protect from it. My IT career taught me that there is nothing worse than the sneering tech guy in the corner scoffing at those that don't understand everything. But what we do try and do on this podcast is bring everybody along for the ride and talk about it in a language that everyone can understand. And yes, we're all going to be relying on our internet connection for our work, for buying gifts, and just about everything. Almost every aspect of our life is controlled that way now. For cyber criminals, the COVID-19 pandemic this year is nothing short of an outstanding business opportunity. And as a result, those cyber criminals have taken full advantage. For example, attackers have targeted COVID-era lifelines such as e-commerce, healthcare and educational services with short, complex, high-throughput attacks that are designed to quickly overwhelm and take down targeted entities. And the impact of that activity is significant. And Assert measured just how much DDoS traffic crosses global and regional infrastructure, traffic that we all pay for. And I've got some great stats here. This was on the Netscout website, and that is 4.83 million attacks in 2020 so far this year, which is a 15% increase on 2019. And there was also a 25% increase during the height of pandemic lockdown. So as those Black Friday and holiday season emails begin to bombard your inbox, it's only a matter of time before we start talking about the hidden impact of a DDoS attack and a DDoS traffic. We're going to be hearing more and more about it over the next few weeks, but I wanted to dive in a little bit deeper, and as a guy that likes a proactive rather than reactive approach, let's talk about it right now. So having read that report over at Netscout, I decided to invite them on the podcast today. And for those of you that don't know, Netscout do consider themselves to be the guardians of the connected world. And they provide real-time pervasive visibility and insights that customers need to accelerate and secure their digital transformation. But enough from me. Buckle up and hold on tight so I can beam your ears all the way to South Wales, where Darren Anstee from Netscout is waiting to speak with us today about all things DDoS, what to expect, how to protect, and other trends in that space too. So let's get Darren onto the podcast right now. A massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
So thanks for having me, Neil. So my name's Darren Anstee. I'm the CTO for security at Netscout, and I work within the corporate CTO office at Netscout. I came to Netscout through their acquisition of Arbor Networks as a part of the Danaher Communications business unit back in 2015. And prior to that, I'd been with Arbor since 2003. As I'm sure many of you listening will know, Arbor is kind of best known for being the market-leading provider of DDoS detection and mitigation solutions to ISPs and enterprises all around the world. And we've held that market leadership position for the last 10 to 15 years. So I have a lot of background in that space, given my tenure at Arbor. Other things I'm kind of, looking at a lot, things like core routing and switching, other aspects of enterprise security, mobile security. Those are kind of my core areas of background and technology know-how, I suppose. In terms of my role at Netscout, I'm very focused on our security strategy as we go forward. I'm very focused, obviously, on the DDoS side of things, given my background. I also look a lot at our ISP visibility portfolio, our enterprise security portfolio, and again, as we move into the future with things like 4G, 5G security offerings, which are becoming a big talking point out there at the moment.
And I'm quite conscious, as we record this podcast here in the UK, we're preparing to go back into lockdown. Most people are working from home. And at the busiest time of year for retailers who are going to be looking to recoup a lot of losses during the Black Friday sales and the holiday season sales, many will fall victim to a DDoS attack. We've seen it in the past with, I think Macy's was an obvious example, but just to get everybody listening on the same page, I don't want to assume everyone knows what they are. So can you set the scene and tell me a little bit more about what a distributed denial of service attack is and why it is such an easy attack method?
Yeah, so DDoS attacks have been around a long time, and they're all about consuming some or all of the resources that are assigned to or available to a network service or an application. And the goal of the attacker is to make sure that genuine users can't get through, genuine transactions can't happen. An attack can be as simple as filling up a network pipe, so causing congestion, a bit like a traffic jam on a motorway fundamentally. And that's what we call a volumetric attack. And those are the simplest attacks, those are the brute force attacks. And that's what you tend to hear about on the news with these attacks at hundreds of gigabits per second or terabits per second in size. They are all about the attacker just throwing very large volumes of traffic, at a target so that the network fills up, genuine stuff can't get through. But it is important to kind of realize that not all DDoS attacks are like that. They can be much more sophisticated, much more stealthy, much harder to detect. They can target the way in which our infrastructure and our applications work. And those are the attacks that we call state exhaustion and application layer attacks. And we actually need different kinds of defenses to deal with these more sophisticated attacks than we do the big kind of volumetric brute force ones, if you see what I mean. There's a different set of solutions that need to react in a different way to deal with those different kinds of attacks. In terms of DDoS being, really easy to launch, I think the key thing to know about DDoS attacks is that there are a lot of services out there, botnets for hire effectively, that make it very simple, very cheap for anyone to launch a large or sophisticated attack at pretty much anything for any reason. And those services are behind the majority of attacks out there. There aren't lots of people running attack tools from their home PCs. It's these services that generate most of the attack traffic. And these services are businesses. So they're innovating, they're competing, they're making sure that their capabilities evolve so that they can stay successful. And they also add a layer of indirection between the victim of the attack and the person who's looking to actually launch the attack. And that makes it even less likely that culprits will get caught. So, DDoS is a fairly interesting area that's still evolving. As you mentioned, there's a lot more reliance at the moment on the connected world, given, everyone working from home. We've seen attacks around Black Friday in the past. We have new consoles coming out in the next couple of months. And again, there's been attacks around those in the past, especially over the Christmas period. So there's been a lot of things going on this year, and I think we'll see a lot more towards the end of the year as well.
And in your recent threat intelligence report, one of the reasons I invited you on today was because Netscout revealed that the COVID-19 pandemic has actually created a seismic shift in how we work and live, especially because obviously we're personal browsing in our spare time, we're working from home, and our shopping and everything is heavily reliant, of course, on that internet connections. But it also added rocket fuel to the growth of DDoS attacks. But can you expand on that and some of your findings?
Yeah. So, every year we see changes in the DDoS threat landscape. As I mentioned, the services behind this need to stay successful. People's defenses get more sophisticated. And again, the attacks need to evolve to overcome those defenses if the services want to be successful. But we did see some really significant changes this year. DDoS has been around for over 20 years. When I joined Netscout, when I joined Arbor back in 2003, we used to talk about, attacks at, 500 megabits per second being significant. Now on the news, we only talk about attacks that are like 500 gigabits per second. So there have been some huge changes over the last couple of decades in the scale of attacks. And at Netscout, we've invested a lot in monitoring what's going on around the world in terms of DDoS activity. And we do that using a system called Atlas, which is a cloud platform that around 400 of our ISP customers send data to every hour about the attacks that they see on their networks. So we have a very good and unique picture of what's going on all around the world in terms of DDoS, and we can drill down into that picture to see what's going on regionally, per country, per vertical, those kinds of things. This year, the really big change that we've seen is in attack frequencies. Generally, if you look at the kind of the 9 months that we've had so far, we're up about 15% this year on last year. But during the months when large parts of the world were in lockdown, we were up about 25% in terms of attack frequencies. In May, for example, we tracked just shy of 1 million attacks during that month, so roughly one every 3 seconds. And just to contrast that, last year we were tracking on average about 700,000 a month. So, there's always a lot of activity going on out there around the world, but there has been a big jump this year in attack frequencies, a much greater level of growth than we've seen in previous years. What's, I suppose, important to realize, though, is that growth has not been kind of uniform all around the world across, all different verticals and things like that. There's been, some big increases in Western Europe, some smaller increases in various parts of Asia Pacific. There's been some big increases around attacks targeting things like educational institutions, healthcare, e-commerce, those kinds of things. And unfortunately, where we've seen the big growth in attacks has tended to be around the verticals that we are more reliant on at the moment, given that we are all working from home, that we are, shopping online, that we are, needing to access distance learning, those kinds of things. And, that's obviously not a good thing.
And I'm curious, are there any key metrics or stats from that threat intelligence report, just for any people listening, that will bring to life what we're talking about here?
Yeah, I mean, I've kind of mentioned that attack frequencies are being out. There's, a lot more going on out there. I think the other two big changes that we've seen this year are in attack complexity and attack duration. I kind of mentioned at the start that there are multiple different types of DDoS attacks. There's the brute force volumetrics, and then the more sophisticated stealthy state exhaustion and application layer attacks. Attack complexity has changed a lot, and that's the really worrying shift that we've seen. We're seeing attackers use a lot more what we call attack vectors during a single attack. So multiple different attack mechanisms targeting different aspects of infrastructure and applications, either in parallel or in sequence. So they're either launching multiple different attack vectors at the same time, at the same target, or they're launching a couple of attack vectors and then, a few seconds or a minute later, they shift to a different set of attack vectors. And they're kind of doing this to make attacks harder to defend and, to make their attacks more effective fundamentally. This year, we've seen huge growth in attacks using 15 plus attack vectors, over a couple of 1,000% actually, over the last couple of years. And there's been a huge drop just this year in attacks using a single attack vector, down 43%. So, attackers are combining these attack vectors together. They know it makes them harder to deal with. They know it makes them harder to analyze if you're trying to do all of those things manually. At the same time, we've also seen attack durations getting shorter. So we're now standing at about 92% of attacks going on out there lasting less than an hour. One thing that's important to realize about that, though, is that if you hit somebody with a short-lived attack, that doesn't necessarily mean when the attack finishes that everything goes back to normal. That is the case for things like volumetric attacks. If you fill the pipe up, when you take what's filling the pipe up away, the pipe is still there, it works great. That's not necessarily the case for the more sophisticated and kind of stealthy attacks, that the state exhaustion and application layer attacks. When they get through, when they cause problems, you can quite often you quite often have to restart various things like load balancers, firewalls, proxies, those kinds of things, which can lead to long service recovery times. So attacks are getting shorter. What we're seeing is that this kind of growth in these short, sharp shock type tactics, effectively hit the target hard, make it fall over, and then kind of move on. The why of that is actually quite interesting. And, I kind of mentioned before that a lot of attacks out there now are launched by services, the majority of them. These services are businesses. And if you think about any business that's hiring a resource, they are looking to recycle their assets as quickly as possible. It's like car hire. You want to hire a car to somebody, get it back, and then give it to somebody else as fast as possible to make as much money as possible. This is the same thing that's happening in the DDoS services space. They want their attacks to be quick and effective so that they get paid and so that they can move on to renting out their botnet or their infrastructure or their capability to the next customer. That drive to make money, and to some extent, better defenses. So attacks are getting more complex to get around those defenses, is really driving the threat landscape out there at the moment. And we're seeing a lot of continued evolution there.
And I'm curious, as somebody that's working right in the heart of this space and you're used to following the trends and how things are advancing, was there anything that surprised you in this report?
I think there are two things that really spring to mind. The first really is, well, they're actually both in the same vein, and they're kind of looking at how attacks get generated. The first is in the kind of the broadening spread of infrastructure that attackers are looking to exploit in terms of IoT devices. Everyone remembers, the Mirai botnet, the first big IoT botnet used for DDoSing Dyn back in 2016. A lot of media around that back then. Mirai obviously is still out there. There are thousands of new variants targeting a broader range of, IoT devices using much more sophisticated exploits than we saw back then with, simple password lists. So that's still out there, that's still being used. But there are also new families now of IoT malware like GAFGIT, things like that, which are targeting an even broader range of IoT devices, looking to, subsume those devices into botnets so that they can be used for a variety of nefarious purposes. DDoS, obviously, we've been talking about today, data theft, being used as proxies, a whole range of different things. So that's kind of the first trend, and that's actually continuing to accelerate. This broadening of the IoT base that's being targeted for compromise. The second trend is kind of in the same vein, and that's that we're now seeing a lot more Linux malware than we used to in the past. Again, looking to compromise a broader range of devices, but in this case, we're talking about servers predominantly. We think this kind of started because some of the IoT devices out there use a Linux distribution, but what we're seeing now is that, attackers are starting to target the data centers, servers that are in data centers fundamentally that are running Linux. Those servers are usually very well connected. They've got a lot of network, a lot of processing power, memory, so they can be used to launch some fairly large attacks. Over the past few years, we've seen attackers use what are known as packet cannons in data centers where, they'll actually rent or deploy infrastructure to launch attacks. Now what they're looking to do is cut that cost out effectively by compromising other people's kit that's in those data centers. So, those are the two main trends that we're seeing, this growth in Linux malware and this broadening spread of IoT that's being compromised at the moment.
And of course, online stores and websites are now the front door to every single business. And if that goes down, the whole business is pretty much shut down too. So how are you helping businesses with challenges like this and everything else that we've discussed today?
So I think the main way that we're helping broadly across the market is by letting everybody know what's going on out there. And, we're talking about the latest generation of the Netscout threat report here today. We do that biannually so that everybody is aware of what's going on. They are aware of how attacks are changing so that they can best prepare their defenses. And, that's why we do it. And that's why we have things like Cyber Threat Horizon on our webpage so that anyone can go and look at that to understand DDoS trends for their region, for their vertical. Beyond that, obviously, we are the market leaders in this space. We've been doing DDoS defense now for over 20 years. We have a lot of expertise and experience of helping ISPs and enterprises all around the world deal with DDoS attacks and also manage other risks that they face around performance and security. So, there are a lot of areas that we can help in. So if there are any businesses out there that do want help, do want advice, we are happy to just provide that advice. And we can help organizations at pretty much any scale.
And for anyone listening that would like to take you up on that offer and ask your advice, download the report, stay in touch with everything that's happening now and in the future at Netscout. What's the best way of doing that?
So the best way is to go to our website at netscout.com. There's a lot of information there on what we do on our product set. If you drill down into the threat intelligence section, you'll be able to download this report. And you'll also find access to Cyber Threat Horizon there, which allows you to really explore what's going on across the DDoS threat landscape using our Atlas system. Fundamentally, access to that isn't controlled. You can sign up for that and get reports on what's going on in your region for the last month, last quarter, last year, very, very easily, very, very quickly.
Well, I suspect over the next few weeks, we're going to be hearing more and more about these kind of attacks. So more than anything, just a big thank you for taking the time to come on here, explain it in a language that everyone can understand, and also how you're helping businesses overcome attacks like this or prevent them too. But thanks for coming on and sharing that with me today.
Thanks for the opportunity, Neil. Hope to speak to you again.
When we hit 2021 in just a couple of months, I want to get Darren back onto this podcast to look back at the lessons that we learned over the holiday seasons. And I predict some of those questions will be, what happened on Black Friday and Cyber Monday? Who was affected and who wasn't? Did the Xbox and PlayStation networks cope with the demand and the attacks over the holiday period? Who prevented DDoS attacks and who were victims? I predict these are all the kind of conversations we're going to be having over the next few weeks. So in a few months, let's get Darren back on here and have a conversation about those lessons learned. In that time, I also invite each and every one of you listening to let me know your insights, predictions, or around DDoS attacks, what we can expect this year. There's always an opportunity for you to come on here too, or just to email me your thoughts. So do that by emailing me at techblogwriter@outlook.com. My website is techblogwriter.co.uk. So let's keep this conversation going. And I kind of love this proactive rather than reactive approach here of talking about all the things that are going to be in the headlines in a few weeks from now. So I'm interested in your thoughts. And if there are any top tech gadgets that you're looking for on Black Friday and Cyber Monday, please let me know your suggestions for that too. I'm always a sucker for a good bargain or tech gadget. But enough rambling from me. Keep your messages, questions, etc. coming into me. Keep me sane during this lockdown period so I don't get cabin fever. And I'll join you again tomorrow on the microphone, nice and early. So please don't be late. Thanks for listening. And until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.